So how do we have a conversation about what people need without asking people, what do you need? That's always been a problem with government.
We're here today with New York State Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz, who represents the 39th State Assembly District in Queens. You represent Jackson Heights, Corona, Elmhurst, the epicenter of the epicenter. So how's it going for you?
Look, it's been quite a roller coaster ride. When the decision was made to close the city, in the way that it was, that gradual decision, and the state, I began thinking about the type of community that I represent and what were their needs going to be, how do we shift things. First thing I did is I actually shut down my re-election operations. During that time, that weekend right before, everybody was collecting signatures, doing all these things to make sure that we could run for re-election again. It was all politics all day, every day during those days. I stopped collecting signatures even before the governor announced. I shifted my volunteer efforts to helping us check in on seniors and our neighbors. How are people doing? And I was lucky enough to hook up with World Central Kitchen, which is an organization run by the very famous chef, Jose Andres, that basically helped us provide meals for our community every day. And we grew gradually. We started off with, on our first day, we gave out 300 lunches. And we're like, oh, this is fantastic. And now we're at 2,000 to 2,200, depending on the donations we get that day, daily, 6 days a week. And so, we're seeing the devastation to a community that was already living on the fringes of poverty. I represent folks who are Hollywood stars in one part of the neighborhood, and I represent folks who are undocumented day laborers and street vendors in another part of the neighborhood. So it's quite a divide in how they can access resources and the resources that are actually available to them. So we just shifted our operations. We knew that people needed very basic things to simply survive. And that's what we have been doing.
Your community, your district is one of the most hard hit in every area. How would you say the people of your district are handling the crisis?
One of the beautiful things that the people who live in this community know is that, unfortunately, this has not been the first crisis we face. But every time there's a crisis, someone in our community gets attacked. There is an anti-LGBTQ situation happening, or one of our Muslim brothers and sisters gets attacked. Every single time our community bonds together and we start fighting back. And the fighting back depends on what the issue is. In this particular instance, I saw neighbors reach out and say, how do I help? How can I help you make sure that we are getting food to people, that we are getting medicines to folks? So we saw our phone bank be able to make thousands of calls because of these volunteers. We saw people reach out and say, I'm doing a GoFundMe. I'm going to buy a bunch of lunches. Can I bring him over to your office? We saw many of the teachers in the community who live in another neighborhood reach out and say, I'm collecting cans for you. Can I bring you the dry goods? Absolutely. And so we saw folks who still had the means to help reach out and say, I'm here. How do I do it?
Is there anything going on that you feel like that's not being addressed or should be addressed in your district?
Absolutely. Look, I think, so let me give you a little bit of the demographics of the people that I represent so that we can have the context of what's missing. 60% of the people that are in my community were born in another country. about 40% of them have a non-citizen status or no status at all. That means they're refugees, they have DACA, they're undocumented. The most important thread in all of those is these are the folks who cannot vote. So they're often ignored by the politicians who seek the power. Think of that piece. What that means is these folks have been contributing billions with a B of dollars into the US economy via taxes, purchasing power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are street vendors, there are day laborers, there are nail salon technicians, these are our restaurant workers, our nannies, our daycare workers, our cleaners. These are all the folks who are helping keep it together for the rest of us. And so when this hit, what did we do? We neglected to find solutions for them. And how do we help them survive and go through this? The federal bailout left them out. The state bailout only gave them access to a small portion of the money. And so I saw a line, that's the clearest example. It started with 300 people. With 300 meals needed to over 2,000. There were days, and there are still days, where I have to turn people away because I don't have enough. And these are the folks who routinely have been marginalized. And the conversations are being had about them without them. And so the mayor's proposing reopening. The governor's proposing reopening. I looked at the list of the people in the governor's reopening task force. Not a single member of my community. I looked at, very well-meaning folks and very good folks, but none of them live or work in any of the 3 neighborhoods that have the highest number of infections. That's disheartening. I'm hearing about the mayor's, I believe it's called like a equality task force or something along those lines. Same thing. So how do we have a conversation about what people need without asking people, what do you need? That's always been a problem with government. So one of the things I'm working on and the pieces of legislation I've put forward have all been based on things that people have asked me for, especially around COVID. I'm working on legislation that will help incentivize businesses to hire more workers post-COVID because these people have lost their jobs. I'm working on a piece of legislation that will make sure, actually I've already introduced it, that will give access to New Yorkers to a fund that's managed by the city that gives people money for burials, and that doesn't limit it based on your immigration status. And so I think the part that's missing is that. How do we have a conversation about what people need in these particular communities without including these particular communities?
With the relationship that you have now with local and state government, do you feel that everybody would be on board with, championing these things? Because this is not the first time I've heard it. I've heard from an elected official about those necessary steps that need to be taken post-COVID. But just in your general purview, do you feel like the relationship is there to get these things done?
I think it isn't so much about the relationship. I think it's about whether individual elected officials are going to be more willing to put people before their own ego and their own political needs. And that's an answer for them to give. We're going to start seeing who really is about the people, who's about the politics. Because I'll give you an example. I have seen several bills floating around and ideas, and you see them mentioning on the news. At the end of the day, and maybe this is just how I operate, I don't really care who sponsors it, as long as it gets it done. But there are elected officials who will put politics before the need of their own community. I mean, we saw it during the budget. We saw it at the end during the budget where people voted and where people negotiated with the lives of others. And I'm referring specifically to bill reform rollbacks, and so that they could keep the power in the majority. And I guess we're going to see I will say this. The small caveat to that comment is that I have been approached once I introduced the Dignified Burial Act, for example, by folks saying we want to be helpful to get to pass this. Because I think those particular folks understood that it wasn't about them, it wasn't about me, that it was about the people that it was going to benefit. Because frankly, most electeds, if this were to happen in our families, we could afford to do this. But it's the people that we represent. And so I am hoping that folks will have some sort of, I don't know if the word is awakening, but would prioritize the things that really matter.
Everything is done remotely.
Mm-hmm.
How do you envision the state going about its legislative process?
In Spanish, there's a saying, la necesidad es something along these lines. Es el padre de la imaginación, or something along those lines. And that basically is that need is the father of imagination. So if we need to legislate, because we do, we're going to figure it out. We began by passing laws that would allow us to vote remotely. We have continued to do conference via digital means. We still introduce bills digitally. We still legislate that way, and we still serve the community. Like, for example, I closed my office physically so that all I do is food, give out food to the community. But my phone lines, my email, my digital media is still open for constituent services. So there is no excuse to not do the job that we got elected to do. I have seen a few folks who think this is an excuse. I've seen a few electeds who think that simply having a Zoom conference or putting a few tweets or Instagram posts is enough, and it's not. People are hungry, people need things, and it's not fair. There are times when I will say a lot about what the governor does or does not do, or agree or not agree. But there was a statement he made, I want to say it was like the first or second week during a press conference, where folks were questioning. I remember the reporter questioning whether we were going to go back to Albany to legislate or not. And he says something to the extent of, these folks were elected to serve. If they didn't want to serve, they shouldn't have run for office. Wholeheartedly agree.
So there's people feeling a little antsy, they're feeling the cabin fever, people wanting to protest and wanting to get out, but also there's also the dissemination of misinformation about what caused this, how you get it. How is that taking a toll on your communities?
I understand people's frustration. I get that piece. But I think for a very long time, American culture, and I say American, United States culture, has been very individualistic. And I think our president, actually, I didn't vote for him, so he's not my president. The president's stance on a lot of things has only served to fuel this feeling of, if it doesn't affect me, it must not be true. I haven't had anyone die. This must be a hoax. And so when you come from hearing that all the way to the top, there are people from the community who are going to just listen to him blindly. I mean, you saw what happened when he's like, oh, you should drink some cleaner. And everybody, and you saw poison control's numbers like skyrocket on the days after. It's insane. And so when I hear that, I worry for my community, because I am getting daily calls on people dying. One of the things our office has been doing is fielding calls to help people do that connection between where the person passed away, be it home or the hospital, with who's going to pick up the body, be it the morgue or the funeral home, and what happens if they want to repatriate the body, or what happens if they want to cremate it, do they have enough money? So all those dots, we've been having to help people connect them. I'm getting calls on folks dying several times a day, on some days more than others. So when I see folks protesting in Albany and in other places that are still very close to my neighborhood, relatively, not across the country, it's even in the same state, I worry because I wonder what is it going to take for them to start coming down here and doing that mess and protesting that way, not caring even about their own lives. So all I can do is continue to educate my community and remind them that this is not over, and do it by example. I don't leave the house without a mask. I wear gloves as often as I can, and I continue to deliver social media, written, and even in person. I mean, you have to, I think the day you were there filming, I had to tell a few people 6 feet apart, because we're trying to continuously educate folks that that coronavirus is still very much an active situation in our communities.
So you've been able to go around your district, correct?
Yes.
How are they feeling? How are they taking this? How are they responding to it? I know that you mentioned that, they're coming together. We
go through our ups and downs. It's a roller coaster of human emotion. I've had people cry. I had one woman ring my doorbell as I was closing, and I tell her, I don't have any more food left. She's like, no, my husband died this morning and I have no idea what to do. I've had members of my community, I go for a run about 3-4 times a week, mask and everything. And by now, some of my neighbors recognize me and they'll stop and say, thank you, how can we help? I've had some of my business owners call me and tell me how desperate they are to be able to reopen, and that how awful it was that even though they applied for the bailout money, it went to other places. So there is this roller coaster of emotions where we feel okay because we're alive, but we feel sad because of the things we've seen. We feel angry, we feel anxious. And I don't see that roller coaster of emotions ending anytime soon, because it's going to take a while and a lot for us to be able to be the resilient community that we need to be.
What do you feel like the outset or the outcome is going to be for the businesses in your communities?
I think the harsh reality is we're going to see a large portion of them stay closed because they're not going to be able to afford to reopen. We are going to see some new ones pop up because I think the needs of the community may change in certain sections. We're going to see some mergers. We are going to also see some staples in our neighborhood reopen and come back strong. Eventually, they will struggle at first, but eventually I do see them reopening. I fear what it's all going to look like, because right now when I drive past them, it's everything shuttered down for the most part. Gates down, no workers, nobody in them. And so I think toward the end of the summer, we're going to have a clearer picture of what it's all going to look like.
Is there anything outside of the federal government bailing out small businesses that small businesses can try to do in order to be able to reopen?
I think that's going to depend on the small business itself and the individual means and the individual's means. Yes, there may be some private loans they could take, but we're going to have to look after them and to make sure that they're not taking advantage of these small businesses by giving them exorbitant rates. I do think that the idea of merging or becoming partners with other folks in the community is something to explore. I think if landlords are smart, they're going to work with current tenants to make sure that they can stay and just pay off whatever rent they owe in a slower pace. Because otherwise it's like, so you're going to close this one, who's going to rent your space? There's not going to be that many folks reopening businesses. There are some, but not that many. So I think it's going to be an individual case by case. What is it that you need, and what are you going to be doing to make that decision on whether you open up or not? I mean, the unfortunate part is that we have a federal leadership that says that they're pro-business, but they're not pro-small business, they're pro-large business. And so while large conglomerates who can afford to bail themselves out or ask their shareholders to be bailed out, we're taking $10 million from the funds that we're giving. We have folks in my district who applied on the last day and were like, tough nuggies, you don't get any money.
What about rent freezes that need to happen in order for it to actually happen?
What about the process?
Yeah.
So there are several pieces of legislation that are proposing a rent freeze. I think for the idea of a rent freeze to work, the closest bill that I think would get us to that is a bill that's being proposed by Assemblymember Yulene New, which would freeze the rent, but would also give money to a landlord so that especially the small landlords, because this isn't about bailing out the big landlords, so that they can still maintain. Because the idea isn't let's freeze rent and screw the small landlord. The idea is we're freezing rent because the small landlord, if he has a hardship, can apply for a mortgage, for his own mortgage or her own mortgage payments to be frozen. But yes, still has to pay heat. Yes, it still has to pay water. So let's figure out how do we help with those pieces. We are going to be faced with mass displacement if we don't pass some sort of rent freeze bill, executive order, or other policy. That's just a reality. Because what happens when you stop doing evictions in June? You still have rent due, but now you have people who all those months couldn't pay the rent, now have no job, and many of them can't even afford to feed themselves. You're going to be asking them for back rent from where? They don't have the money.
It's eventually it's going to happen. It's just the X's and O's that need to be mapped out. Is there anything that you would like to mention or address that you feel like hasn't been mentioned or hasn't been expressed?
I do want to express eternal gratitude to my neighbors, to the random strangers who've helped, to my colleagues who've called me just to say, hey girl, how you holding up? It's incredibly tough to do what we do, but it is incredibly rewarding because there are times when I ask myself, what else can I do? What else can I do? And I continue to challenge myself and my team to continue to help our community because there's so much need. But knowing that we have the support of people, from the teachers, the precinct brings us food that's donated. Teachers have brought us diapers because we also give out diapers to families. We've had such an outpouring of support for our local hospital, Elmhurst Hospital. And so while I am flabbergasted, I think that's the word, by the reaction of some of the selfish members of our community, not of my community, like other parts, who want to reopen, I am in awe and eternally grateful to my neighbors, my friends, my mom, to the larger family of humans who stepped up and said, how do I help?
Assemblywoman Cruz, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. And let's get through this better than we were before. I think what people don't understand is we are never going to be the same. We're never going to go back to where we were, but we can certainly be better than we were then.